last week you said, I don't remember whose question it was in response to, but you used the analogy that experiences and dreams are like one night stands, and that there can never be any kind of permanence with any of them. But that understanding, I don't think you said that it was more like marriage, but you said that one should be in search of understanding. And I just wondered if you could say more about that.
Imagine for a moment, Cassie, that okay. I have a brother and a sister. I'm the oldest. Which means that when I was born, my parents I had 2 years of alone time with my parents. I had all of their attention. All their dreams and hopes belonged to me, really. Then my brother came about. My brother is very poor because he could only get 50% of that attention. He would never get a one-to-one time. It's impossible. The sort of attachment my parents have towards me, the firstborn, as is true for, I think, most parents. And the sort of worry they have about their firstborn is very, very different. It's not that they don't love their other kids, they do. But firstborns are just very, very different. My dad, let's just say, sure, I broke some dishes like tonight, and he would take out his bed from the drawer and just belt me, and I would be black and blue. And the more I cried, the more I got whipped. And the more I tried to love him, the more enraged he'd become. Who won't get consumed by that experience? You become profoundly attached to the experience, to the memories, to the pain, to the devastation. It's a psychological narrative that's very difficult to get rid of. And it's a narrative that's going to leak into every aspect of your life. You're going to hate most adults, especially male adults, those whose temperaments are authoritative, because you're going to project your past onto them. That's an experience that whenever you run into any male adults, they are guilty simply because they are male adults. And it's very easy to pass a judgment. It's very easy to kind of put them in a cage, in a category, and then say to yourself, well, that's how they are, so why even spend time with them? And every time you see them, you'll fear them. You have this emotional attachment to this experience, and you're going to react to it. And you're going to justify your emotions. You're going to justify your judgments. You're going to justify the way you think about these people. Then what's going to happen is there comes a point where, because it's a very centerpiece of your life, that you go to work, you have a boss who tells you what to do, what not to do, and then he reminds you of your dad, and you fight him, and you lose your job. Then you go to school, and your instructor tells you ABCD, but he reminds you of your father, and then you fight him, and then you don't pass the class. And then at the age of 30 or 40 or 50, you realize, well, you have no education, you have no money, you have nothing. You don't even have a family because everybody is a jerk. At least that's what you see. But you look at your life, it's ruined. There is nothing that you have. There is nothing that you can claim to be your own. And psychologically, emotionally, you're just a complete mess. And you're tired of being angry all the time. You're tired of being depressed all the time. You're tired of drinking and smoking and having casual relationships with people, never being able to kind of be intimate, make true friendships. And then your boss, with whom you had fought previous week, comes to you and says, for some strange reason he likes you and hasn't yet fired you. He says, because I like you and because you remind me of my own son who passed away 10 years ago, I'm going to have you go see a therapist. Okay. Now remember, all of us want to see ourselves in a justifiable way. Remember, we are not rational being, Cassie. No human being is ever rational. What we do is we rationalize our emotions. We justify our emotions. We are emotional animals. And we try to reason to ourselves and other people as to why we behave in such a way, and we try to justify and validate them. When you go to the therapist, the poor therapist has to sit back for the first 20 weeks, just hear you gossip, tabloid conversation. My father this and my mother that. And I did this to my dad and he did this to me again. And I left my house when I was 12 and I went here and I went there and I went to this relationship and that relationship. And after, a couple of years of going to this therapist, and there is enough trust that's been built. And once in a while your therapist throws out certain things, this catchphrases, and something about you just clicks, and it makes you angry because you realize how you have been, how you have lived has been a complete waste. But it's very difficult to accept. It's very difficult to go on a journey to understand. So you rationalize it. You try to tell the therapist you had every right to behave this way and think this way and feel this way and make these kind of judgments about all the people in your life. Then your therapist has enough liking for you that he finds out where your parents live. And he goes or she goes and kind of figures out where they live, and she goes in to have a chat with them. And let's just say the father has passed and it's just the mother. And the mother brings out a journal that she has been keeping for the past 90 years. And she begins to read from the journal, to the therapist. That my father had a grandfather who was a drunk. And he was a drunk because his mother was sick and he didn't know what to do. He had no money. And the fact that his mother was abandoned by the husband who went and got married to a woman. And then my father had to see his own father have 5 or 6 or 10 jobs just to make sure there is food on the table. That his mother could kind of survive with relative ease. And then the therapist asks if she could borrow this journal to give to me. And, my mother says fine. So I begin to take this journal, I take it home and I begin to read. And I slowly begin to realize that the weight that was on my father, that he would come home after 16-hour working at a factory. He just wanted to come home to a quiet environment. He just wanted to sit and relax for 10 minutes. But we never gave him that chance. And he's a human being, And little by little I begin to piece together this horrific puzzle. And then slowly, without really knowing, I begin to understand the difficulties my father was encountering. To be able to understand anything, you need to be emotionally detached. It's impossible. If you're consumed by emotions, you will never understand anything. It's impossible. Let me kind of respond to your question in this other way. You're a mother now. Sarah is a mother. You have one child, Sarah has 2. There's a great deal you understand about Sarah. Not because you guys are close, not because you guys are friends, not because you know her life intimately. It's because you understand what it means to be a mother. Gening can sit on the outside and see and take notes. It's not her fault. She is not yet a mother, which means there are very, very important components that are missing in her worldview. that gives her a very, very, very incomplete understanding. I'll give you an example. Sarah woke up at 3:30 this morning. Did some work. About 8, took the kids to school. At 9, she went to her mother's house to tidy up a bit since they're coming from their trip. Came home, made some lunch, went back to her mother's house to tidy up some more. Came back home. I took the kids to Kumon. Then she made spaghetti for all of us. And now she's probably passed out in bed. The only way, beginning, you can have an understanding of, what she went through is by closing your eyes and saying, okay, I went to work at 6 until 5 in the afternoon today. Then my mom called me and said if I could go help her out cleaning her house because she has guests tomorrow. So I went and cleaned her house for about 4 hours. And then my companion Saeed called and said, I'm in Oakland, I'd like to spend some time. And I said, okay, that sounds good, even though I really want to rest, but I'm willing to make a sacrifice. I took a shower and I went to the restaurant to meet him. And he was in such an awful mood. And I said to myself, all he had to do was to ask me about my day and I would have told him. But he gave himself the right to just behave however way he wanted to behave. And what you're saying is, I wanted him to ask me how my day was so I could tell him that I woke up at 6, worked till 5, then went to my mom's, worked for another 5 hours. I really wanted to sleep, but because I like him, I love him, I wanted to be with him. I said, okay, yes, I'll see you at the coffee shop. I made all these sacrifices. I had a horrendous day. That's how understanding comes about. Where you can remove yourself from your emotions, where you could create a narrative that is comparable in intensity, in tone, in volume. In many ways, it really depends on what it is that you want to understand, Cassie. A few years ago when I started writing about emotions, how they come about, what the steps are, they're still very incomplete, they're kind of in their infancy. But whenever I put them on the board and I see the faces of the students in the classroom as they're kind of just looking at the board, their jaws become open and they stay open and they don't really know what to do with all the things that they're seeing on the board. They see their emotions so clearly. They see their anger so clearly. It doesn't mean that they know what to do with it, but they see things, they understand things. And in some ways I think it terrifies them, you know. Because to understand anything, Cassie, you have to sit, you have to observe, you have to pay attention, you know, the details. And the details are very, very difficult because, you know, that's where the most important stuff are, in the details, you know. It's not difficult to put the 2x4s up, you know, the trims, the paint, and how you want to arrange your room. If I was to ask you, you know, I remember, I've shared this with you. Hussein told me, let's go to the garage and play ping pong, table tennis. I said, fine. It was his house. So he says, are you going to get married, Amir? I said, yeah, maybe, I don't know. He says, marry but don't have children. I said, why? Just don't have children. It took me many, 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 many years to realize that he was right. Not right completely, but he was onto something, but he didn't really understand what he was saying. What Hussein was saying is, I'm exhausted. You know, my life has turned upside down. You know, marriage is good if you find the right companion. Children, they're trouble. Okay. His temperament, his personality, the way he would think about things did not really allow him to sit and write out why he said, why perhaps having children are no good, why perhaps marriage is no good, why perhaps life is no good. You know, you have to give credit to the Buddha, the wheel of life that he has, you know, that how desires are born, how they burden you, how they entice you, how they trap you, how they force you into boredom, how they create regret and shame inside you, how they depress you. And then as a human being, you look around and say, well, I should do something else. I just can't sit in boredom or nothingness. And then the vicious cycle, you know, takes place again and again and again and again. That requires a great understanding. But to understand anything, you really have to be unforgiving. You have to be profoundly honest. You know, I mean, in some ways, you really put yourself on the cross and you nail your wrist, you nail your feet, you know, because you really want to understand. You want to dissect the thing open and figure out what lives inside it. And it's horrifying because it makes you feel so alone. And these are truths that work for you and are about you and your life and perhaps the life of many people. But it's a burden that you have to carry. You know. Because if you happen to be able to understand things the right way, it needs to come with some decency that you need to have inside you. Because whatever you understand, you can't share it with other people. You can't burden them. And that's one of the flaws with Socrates, I think. That's one of the flaws with Jesus, I think. If, of course, he just went out and talked to people about things. You know, because you ruined their life. I mean, consider the saying, do not store anything down here. It's a place of thieves. Okay. So I go to you and say, I want to get married. You say, doesn't marriage live in time? Doesn't time belong to Caesar? Isn't this a place of thieves where things rot? You want to marry because you love. Isn't love an emotion that comes and goes? You know. You want a companion because you're lonely. Let's sit together and talk about loneliness. Why are you lonely? Because loneliness is a poverty. Why would you want another person to see you? Why can't you be sufficient unto yourself? Do you really want to use and exploit another human being so that you can escape your own loneliness? Who could live like this? You know, because you talk about loneliness, you have to dissect it. You talk about love, you have to dissect it. You have to understand it really, really well. These are just not things that create emotions. You know.